Darren Ames had exactly $32 in his wallet, one bag of groceries in his hand, and a 5-year-old daughter who was obsessed with grilled cheese and asked about her mom every night. It was just supposed to be a walk home from the store, nothing more. He and Lila had taken the long route through Central Park because the weather was finally decent, and she liked to chase pigeons. She was skipping ahead of him, her little curls bouncing, when he spotted her sitting alone on a bench near the fountain, her head buried in her hands, shoulders shaking. "Daddy," Lila whispered, tugging on his sleeve. "Is she okay?" Darren paused, unsure. The woman looked like she came out of a magazine, long black coat, heels she probably wasn't supposed to wear on this kind of path, and a purse that probably cost more than his rent. But she was crying like the world had just collapsed. "Stay here," Darren said gently to Lila, guiding her to sit on the grass nearby. He walked over, slow and careful. "Miss, you okay?" The woman jerked her head up, startled. Her eyes were red, mascara streaking down her cheeks. She tried to fix her expression, but it crumbled right after. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Just having a moment." Darren didn't move. "You sure? 'Cause I've had a lot of moments. They usually don't look like that." A breathy laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it. He smiled. "There it is." She wiped her face, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cry in public. I just needed air. You're allowed. Crying isn't illegal. Yet." She looked at him, probably realizing now how out of place he was, worn hoodie, grocery bag in hand, sneakers that had seen better years. "I'm Brielle," she offered quietly. "Darren," he said. "And that's my daughter, Lila. She's very concerned about your emotional well-being." Brielle glanced at the little girl, who waved shyly from the grass. "She's beautiful." "She's nosy," Darren joked. "But yeah, she is." There was a pause, and the air between them shifted. She looked like she wanted to talk but didn't know how. "You don't have to tell me," Darren said. "I'm just some guy with a kid and a grilled cheese plan. But if you want to talk to someone who's got absolutely zero connection to your life and won't judge you, I'm here." Brielle stared at him for a second, then let out a soft sigh. "My fiancé canceled our wedding. This morning." Darren blinked. "Wow, that's a lot." "Yup. I'm guessing the dress was already bought, and the venue, and the flowers, and the cake." He whistled low. "That's a lot of refunds." "Not really." She gave a bitter smile. "When you're the one paying for everything, you don't ask for anything back." Darren's eyes narrowed just slightly. "You paid," she nodded. "He said he needed time to figure out who he was, after 4 years. I guess I just wasn't part of that version." He didn't know what to say to that, so he sat beside her on the bench. Lila came over and climbed into his lap without a word, pressing her cheek against his chest. "She's shy," Darren explained. "But she gets a vibe about people." Brielle smiled at the girl. "I'm sorry you're seeing me like this." "I've seen worse," Lila said, serious. "My daddy cried once when he burnt the pancakes." Darren covered his face. "Thanks, kid." Brielle actually laughed. A real, unfiltered laugh that made her eyes crinkle and her sadness soften just a little. Darren watched her for a second longer than he should have. "You hungry?" he asked suddenly. Brielle blinked. "What?" "I was gonna make grilled cheese." "We got enough for 3. You're inviting me to dinner, not fancy, just bread, cheese, and whatever's in the fridge, but it's warm, and we got orange juice." Brielle hesitated. "No pressure," he added. "I just figured you might want to not be alone tonight." She stared at him, something unreadable in her expression. "Okay. Yeah, she said, standing. Darren stood too, adjusting Lila in his arms. "Cool. But fair warning, our apartment's small, the elevator's always broken, and Lila watches cartoons at full volume." "Sounds perfect." They walked together out of the park, the oddest trio on the sidewalk. Darren didn't notice the way people glanced at her, the way her coat screamed designer, or how drivers slowed down near the curb. He just opened the door, offered his home, and handed her a sandwich like it was the most normal thing in the world. That night, Brielle sat at a tiny kitchen table with mismatched chairs and peeling paint, laughing at a 5-year-old's knock-knock jokes while Darren washed dishes. And for the first time in days, she didn't feel like crying. She felt like breathing. She felt seen. And Darren, he didn't know her last name, or what kind of car she drove, or what kind of life she had outside that park. But watching her smile at his daughter, seeing the way she reached to tuck Lila's hair behind her ear with such care it did something to his chest. He didn't know that she was a millionaire. He just knew she made the room feel warmer, and he already wanted her to stay. The next morning, Darren found himself staring into the mirror, toothbrush in hand, trying to make sense of the night before. He hadn't expected her to stay not past dinner, certainly not until Lila had crashed on the couch, and Brielle had gently carried her to bed like she belonged in their lives. He definitely hadn't expected to find her curled up in his worn-out armchair this morning, hair pinned up, flipping through one of Lila's picture books like she had nowhere else to be. When he stepped out of the bathroom, towel slung over his shoulder, her eyes met his from across the room. "You have a surprisingly extensive collection of dinosaur books," she said, holding one up. Darren leaned against the doorframe. "Lila's been on a prehistoric kick since January. I've read that one to her so many times I know it by heart. Sounds exhausting. Only when she quizzes me on the difference between a Brachiosaurus and a Diplodocus at 6 in the morning." Brielle gave a small laugh, then set the book aside. "I should probably go." "Probably," he agreed, though something in his chest tightened at the thought. She stood, adjusting the sleeve of the crisp blouse she must have pulled from her bag. He hadn't noticed it last night, too caught up in making sure Lila had brushed her teeth and hadn't stuck crayons in her pockets again. He watched her smooth the fabric down, graceful in the way that people who lived in better neighborhoods always seemed to be. "I'll call a car," she said, reaching for her phone. "You don't have to," Darren said quickly. "I mean, if you're not in a rush, I was going to take Lila down to the community center. They've got a weekend art thing. Paints, glitter, chaos." "You're welcome to come." Brielle hesitated, phone still in hand. "Isn't that, for families?" he shrugged. "You ate grilled cheese in my kitchen. You're basically an aunt now," her brow lifted. "That's your definition of family. It is if you're willing to brave a room full of toddlers with glue sticks." She looked down at herself, then at the door like she was weighing two very different worlds. Finally, she slid her phone into her coat pocket. "All right. But if someone gets paint on these heels, I'm blaming you," he grinned. "Deal." They walked the 6 blocks with Lila skipping between them, one hand in Darren's, the other in Brielle's. The air had that early spring bite, and the sidewalks were littered with cracked chalk drawings from kids who declared winter officially over. Inside the center, the smell of crayons and tempera paint hit them instantly. Children scurried between tables, and the noise level hovered somewhere between mild chaos and impending doom. But Lila lit up like it was Disneyland. "She'll be fine here for a bit," Darren said, watching her run to greet a friend. "The volunteers keep an eye on them." "You want coffee?" Brielle looked surprised. "There's coffee here. Only if you don't mind it coming from a dented thermos and tasting like regret." She laughed again, softer this time. "Still sounds better than the espresso I had yesterday." Darren led her to a folding table near the back where a few other parents sat. He poured them each a cup from the battered dispenser and passed her a paper cup with a wink. 5-star service. She took a sip, winced, and nodded. "Definitely regret." They sat in silence for a moment, watching kids fling glitter with reckless abandon. Then Brielle turned to him, her expression more serious. "Why did you invite me?" He didn't pretend not to understand. "You looked like you needed somewhere to go that didn't expect anything from you." "And you don't expect anything?" "Nope. I've got enough going on. Bills, 2 part-time jobs, Lila's school stuff. I don't have time to play games." She studied him, her eyes searching. "You're not curious about me at all." "I'm curious," he admitted. "But I figure if you wanted me to know something, you'd tell me." Brielle looked down at her cup, then out at the kids again. "Most people don't wait for permission to ask. I'm not most people." "No," she said, glancing at him. "You're not." He didn't press. He didn't ask why her coat had initials embroidered into the lining or why her phone kept lighting up with calls she ignored. He didn't ask what kind of fiancé walks away from a woman like her, or how someone could look that composed after crying in a park the day before. Instead, he sat beside her, sipping coffee that burned his throat and watching his daughter smear blue paint across a paper plate like it was a masterpiece. And without meaning to, he reached over and brushed a flake of glitter off Brielle's cheek. She stiffened slightly, then exhaled. You're not going to ask about yesterday. Nope. Not even a little, only if you want to talk. Otherwise, I'm good sitting here pretending glitter isn't forever. Her smile came slowly this time, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to feel it. That's rare. What is? Someone who doesn't want anything from me. Darren looked at her, really looked. You're allowed to just exist. You don't owe anyone explanations. Brielle folded her arms over her chest, her voice quieter. You don't know who I am. I know you sat on a park bench and cried like your chest had split open, and that you've been kind to my kid. That's more than I know about most people. She looked at him for a long moment, and something about the way her eyes softened made Darren feel like he'd stepped into a moment he wasn't sure he was ready for. Thank you, she said finally. For not asking, he nodded. Anytime. They sat there until Lila ran over with paint-streaked fingers and a paper crown glued together with abandon. Look, Daddy, I made one for you too. She plopped the second crown on Darren's head, then placed one gently on Brielle's. Brielle blinked. I've been crowned? You're Princess of Glitter now, Lila declared. Brielle laughed, and Darren watched her again. That laugh, that crown, the ridiculousness of it all, and something unfamiliar twisted in his chest. He still didn't know her last name. But he was starting to care a whole lot more than he meant to. 3 days later, Darren was elbow-deep in a broken sink at the apartment complex, where he handled odd jobs for rent reduction, when he heard his phone buzzing against the tile floor. He wiped his hands on his jeans, glanced at the screen, and blinked in surprise. Unknown number. Again. He'd ignored the first 2 calls earlier that morning, but something about the persistence tugged at him. He answered cautiously. Darren, he paused. Brielle, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. He looked around at the rust-stained pipes and the puddle forming near his boot. Depends how you define bad. What's up? I need a favor, she said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. Could we meet up? Somewhere private. His brain ticked through the possibilities. Are you okay? I'm not sure yet. That was enough. An hour later, he was standing outside a coffee shop on the Lower East Side, Lila's hand tucked into his, both of them watching the traffic crawl by. When Brielle arrived, she wasn't in heels or that expensive coat. She wore sneakers and a plain navy sweater, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look younger, but also 10 pounds heavier with whatever she was carrying inside. Before Darren could say anything, she crouched in front of Lila. Hi, sweetheart. Would you mind if I borrowed your dad for a little while? Lila blinked up at her. Where are you taking him? Nowhere scary. Just need to talk to him grown up to grown up. Lila narrowed her eyes like a detective in a cartoon. Okay. But bring him back. Brielle gave a solemn nod. Promise. Darren handed over the sketchpad and crayons he'd brought, settling Lila at a shaded table near the window where he could keep an eye on her. Then he followed Brielle down the block, the silence between them thick. She didn't speak until they reached a quiet alley behind an old bookstore, the kind of place no one looked twice at. I didn't want to say this anywhere people might recognize me, she said, folding her arms. Darren leaned against the brick wall, watching her. Recognize you? She met his eyes, hesitant. There's something I haven't told you. I figured. You mean you knew? No, but I figured there was something. Nobody cries like that in a park unless there's more going on than a broken engagement. She hesitated, then pulled something from her bag, a glossy magazine. She handed it to him without a word. Her face was on the cover. Not in the background, not blurred in a crowd front and center, smiling beside a tall man in a suit under the headline. Tech heiress Brielle Ashton, wedding of the year officially canceled. Darren stared at it for a long second. That's you, he said finally. Yes, and Ashton as in Ashton Holdings, she nodded. He closed the magazine and handed it back. Okay, that's all you're going to say. What do you want me to say? I don't know. I thought you might be shocked. I mean, sure. But the grilled cheese still tasted the same. She let out a breath. I didn't lie to you. I just didn't tell you. I get it. She looked at him, uncertain. Most people don't. Darren raked a hand through his hair. I'm not most people. You don't care that I'm who I am. I care that you're someone who showed up for my kid and didn't flinch when she asked if you wanted to wear a glitter crown. Brielle laughed unexpectedly, then covered her mouth like she wasn't supposed to. Darren straightened. But I do care about you hiding. Not the money, not the headlines, just the part where you thought you had to protect yourself from me. I wasn't trying to protect myself from you, she said, voice tightening. I was trying to protect what felt real. The second people know who I am, they change. They start asking for things. Or assuming I owe them something. He nodded slowly. I'm not going to ask you for anything. I know, she said softly. They stood in the quiet for a beat before she stepped closer. I didn't expect to care this much about you, about Lila, but I do. And I needed you to know who I really am before I take another step, toward anything. Darren looked at her, guarded but honest. So what happens now? That depends. Do you still want someone like me in your life? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced through the bookstore window where Lila sat humming to herself, coloring in a duck with orange crayon. You're not a maybe, Brielle. You're a lot, but I don't scare easy. Her eyes shimmered and she nodded once, like she'd been holding her breath for days. I've got another shift at the restaurant in an hour, he said. But you're welcome to come by later. Lila's been asking if you know how to make spaghetti that doesn't come in a can. I do, Brielle said. I also know how to make meatballs that don't taste like rubber. Darren tilted his head. That sounds suspiciously like a challenge. Maybe it is. As they walked back toward Lila, Darren reached out and took Brielle's hand. She didn't pull away, and when Lila looked up and saw them, she gave a big, toothy grin. You brought him back, she declared. Good job. I like to keep my promises, Brielle said, crouching beside her. Lila leaned in close. Want to help me draw a dragon? Brielle glanced at Darren. Only if I get to make it purple. Deal, Lila said, scooting over. Darren watched them settle into the bench together, crayons spread out like confetti. And for the first time in a long time, something in his chest felt undeniably whole. He didn't care about the headlines. He cared about the woman beside his daughter, laughing over a scribbled dragon like it was the most important thing in the world. Because in that moment, it was. The first thing Darren noticed when he opened the door that evening was the smell something rich, warm, and nothing like the usual quick meals he scraped together after shifts. He stepped into the apartment and paused, stunned by the sight of Brielle in his kitchen, apron tied around her waist, sleeves rolled to her elbows, kneading a bowl of dough with her fingers dusted in flour. I hope you don't mind, she said without looking up. Lila said you had flour but never used it for anything besides glue traps. Darren leaned against the doorframe, setting down his keys. That's because baking requires precision, and I operate in more of a chaos-based system. She glanced up then, her eyes bright. Well, tonight we're doing things my way. I needed a distraction, and your kitchen was the perfect battlefield. Where's Lila? In the living room with a blanket fort and a very firm rule that I'm not allowed to enter unless I know the password. He chuckled, toeing off his shoes. She's getting strict. She's building boundaries, Brielle said. It's healthy. He walked over and peered into the pot on the stove. Is that homemade sauce, family recipe? Well, family chef's recipe. I stole it before I moved out. Darren raised an eyebrow. Moved out? Brielle wiped her hands on a towel, her expression shifting. I left the penthouse. I'm staying in a hotel for now. I needed space to figure out what I actually want when I'm not surrounded by people who expect me to be a certain version of myself. You're walking away from all that. I'm not walking away from the company, she said. I'm still on the board, but I'm stepping back from the public circus. No more interviews, no more curated appearances, just life as it is. He studied her, the flower on her cheek, the quiet ease in her shoulders. And what does that life look like? I don't know yet, she admitted. But when I picture it, it doesn't feel right unless you and Lila are in it. Darren didn't reply immediately. He walked to the counter, picked up a fallen spoon, rinsed it, then turned back to her. I've been thinking about you all day, he said. And not just in the way that makes my chest feel weird. I've been thinking about what this means. You, me, Lila, how it fits. Brielle swallowed. And I don't care about titles or money, but I do care about honesty. I need to know that what's happening between us isn't temporary. Not just for me, for Lila too. She's already asking if you'll be here tomorrow. She doesn't ask that unless she's serious. Brielle stepped forward. I'm serious too. I don't want you to get caught up in this because it feels different from what you're used to. I'm not caught up in anything, she said firmly. I'm choosing this. I've had 3 proposals in my life and none of them felt real, but what happened in that park, that was real. You didn't know who I was. You didn't want anything from me. You just saw me. He looked at her quietly. I still do. She reached into her bag on the counter and pulled out a small velvet box. Darren blinked. That better not be what I think it is. It's not a ring, she said quickly. It's something else. She opened it to reveal a silver key. I bought the apartment across the hall, she said. It's a temporary solution until we figure out what we want. I just didn't want to be far. Darren let out a slow breath. You're serious. I'm not asking to move in, not yet. But I want to be close enough to build something real, piece by piece, without rushing it. He took the keys slowly, holding her gaze. You're really bad at doing things halfway, I know, she whispered. But I'm learning. That night, they ate together, all three of them, at the small table Darren had repaired more times than he could count. Lila wore a paper crown she'd made herself and declared Brielle Minister of Noodles with great ceremony. They laughed through dinner, trading stories and sauce-stained jokes, and when Lila finally fell asleep curled up in her blanket fort, Darren pulled Brielle out onto the fire escape. The city stretched below them, lights twinkling, voices echoing faintly from the street. The air was cool, not cold, and the sky was the kind of deep blue that only came after a day that had gone exactly the way you needed it to. I don't have a ring, he said quietly, his arm around her waist. She leaned into him. I'm not asking for one, but I want to give you something better. She turned to face him, unsure. I want you to know that this isn't just a fling for me. You came into our lives and made them feel more. He hesitated, then pulled something from his pocket. It was a small slip of paper, folded neatly. She opened it, brows furrowed. It was a sketch drawn in crayon of 3 stick figures holding hands. One had wild, curly hair. One had a crown. The last had a big smile and a toolbox. She drew that this morning, Darren said. Told me it was our family. Brielle's throat tightened. I don't even know what to say. Just say you're staying. She turned, pressing her forehead to his. I'm staying. And when he kissed her, it wasn't tentative or questioning. It was the kind of kiss that promised something lasting, something built on more than convenience or timing. It was the solid, steady kind of love that dug deep and stayed. Below them, the city kept moving. But for Darren, for Brielle, for Lila asleep inside, it had paused. Just long enough to let them catch up to something they hadn't known they were searching for. A new beginning. A real one, together. Darren adjusted his tie with the kind of care only someone deeply uncomfortable with formal wear could manage. The bathroom mirror in Brielle's new apartment, directly across from his, reflected a man who still couldn't believe his life had shifted so drastically in so little time. The dark suit clung to him better than anything he'd ever worn, tailored courtesy of Brielle's insistence that he at least own one thing that didn't come off a clearance rack. He could hear Lila's voice from the hallway, high and excited. You look like a spy. Like one of the ones that jumps from rooftops. I'll take that as a compliment, he called out, stepping into the living room. Brielle stood near the window in a floor-length emerald green gown, her hair swept up in soft curls, a pair of simple diamond earrings catching the warm light. She turned toward him, and for a moment, Darren forgot what he'd been about to say. You're staring, she said, a little breathless. Can you blame me? He crossed the room, gently taking her hand, and lowered his voice. You look like the reason people stop in the middle of the street. She tilted her chin. You clean up pretty well yourself. I had help, he said. You threatened to burn my old suit. It deserved it. Lila darted between them in a bright blue dress with glittery sneakers, holding a small purse filled with crayons. Can we go now? I want to see the big room with the sparkly lights. Brielle crouched to adjust Lila's clip. Let's make a deal. You behave for the first hour and I'll let you pick 1 dessert from the catering table. 2. Fine, 2, but only if you promise not to climb on anything. Lila held up her pinky. Deal. The car that pulled up outside wasn't a town car or a rideshare. It was a sleek, black electric sedan with a driver in a pressed uniform. Darren blinked at it, then at Brielle. Tell me you didn't buy that just for tonight. No, she said, but the driver's mine. I asked him to stay on until we figure out what kind of life we're building. And what kind is that? The kind where you don't have to worry about walking 10 blocks in the rain with a sick kid because you couldn't afford a cab. He said nothing at first, just opened the door for her and Lila. When he slid in beside them, he leaned closer and murmured, "You know I'd still love you if we took the subway." "I know," she said, brushing her fingers lightly across his knee. "But I'd rather see you comfortable." The event was a charity gala, something Brielle had agreed to host before her life unraveled. She hadn't backed out, but she had rewritten the entire guest list, slashing it from 300 to 70, and insisted on holding it in a restored greenhouse on the Upper East Side instead of a luxury hotel ballroom. The space was wrapped in glass and filled with string lights and soft jazz, the scent of blooming jasmine drifting through the air. Darren stayed close to her side, watching as she greeted donors and old acquaintances with practiced warmth. Lila stayed tucked between them, eventually drifting off into a quiet corner with a tablet and headphones, supervised by one of Brielle's longtime assistants. When a gray-haired executive approached, drink in hand, Darren tensed. "I heard you've left the penthouse," the man said. "Some of us were betting it was only a matter of time." Brielle's smile didn't waver. "Did you win anything?" the man chuckled. "Only bragging rights, but I must admit I didn't expect you to show up with, well." His eyes flicked to Darren. "Someone who actually knows how to fix a sink," she offered dryly. "Shocking, I know." Darren didn't flinch. He wrapped an arm casually around her waist, meeting the man's gaze. "I also make a mean grilled cheese." The man blinked, unsure how to respond. Brielle leaned in with a voice like velvet. "If you're here to donate, the table's over there. If not, I'd recommend the bar. They're serving honesty tonight, strong pour." As the man walked away, flustered, Darren exhaled. "That was satisfying," she finished. He kissed her temple. "You're incredible." Later in the evening, as the guests mingled in smaller knots and the formalities faded, Brielle tugged Darren toward the back of the greenhouse, where a narrow wooden footbridge crossed a koi pond lit from below. He followed her out, the sounds of music and laughter softening behind them. When they reached the center of the bridge, she turned to face him. "I want to ask you something," she said, voice low and steady. "Is this where you tell me I've got glitter on my jacket?" She shook her head, eyes serious. "You've given me a quiet life in the middle of chaos. You and Lila, you've given me a home I didn't know I needed." He stepped closer. "You gave me a place to dream again. You made things possible I never thought I'd see." She pulled a small envelope from her clutch and handed it to him. Inside was a deed. His name. Her name. A small brownstone in Brooklyn with a backyard, a second bedroom, and a kitchen that needed work. "I know you love this neighborhood," she said, "but I thought maybe we could build something that's ours." He stared at the paper, then at her. "You bought us a house. I bought us a beginning. But I won't sign anything if you're not ready." He folded the paper carefully, tucking it into his jacket. "I'm ready if you are." She reached for his hand. "Then come home with me." He kissed her fingers, then her mouth, slow and deep and certain. "I already am." That night, they danced beneath the lights of the greenhouse, Lila asleep in a chair nearby, her head resting on a folded jacket. The world outside kept spinning, but inside, time held still. They didn't need champagne to toast or photographers to capture the moment. They had each other, and that was more than enough. 5 months later, on a quiet Saturday morning, Darren stood in the backyard of their new home, holding a cup of coffee while Lila chased a butterfly through the tall grass. The kitchen door creaked open behind him. Brielle stepped out barefoot, robe tied loosely around her waist, a soft smile on her lips. "I think I'm going to plant lavender," she said. "Lavender, huh? And tomatoes, maybe some rosemary. You're a city girl." "You sure you can handle dirt?" She wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her cheek against his back. "With you, I can handle anything." He turned, kissed her hair, and pulled her close. They didn't need the world to understand them. They had built something better than perfect. They had built something real, and it was theirs. Forever.